There is a moment that comes before success that no one ever talks about. Not the moment of decision, not the moment of hard work, not even the moment of failure, which at least still contains the energy of something having happened. I am talking about the moment after all of that. The moment when you have decided and worked and failed and gotten up and tried again and failed again. And the hope that carried you through all of it has finally quietly, without announcement, run out. That moment does not feel like a beginning. It feels like an ending. But for a man named Thomas, the night his hope ran out was the night that everything, every single thing that came after, began. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Have you ever reached that moment? The one where the hope is genuinely gone, not just tested, not just strained, but gone? Tell me in the comments. And please like and subscribe, because what I am about to tell you is for everyone who has sat in that dark and believed incorrectly that the dark was the end. It was not the end. It was the door. Thomas had been trying for 3 years, not dabbling, not half-trying. 3 years of everything he had: money, time, sleep, relationships. The particular kind of optimism that burns brightest when it is most needed and leaves the deepest cold when it finally goes out. He had tried to build a food business, a small catering operation, using recipes from his grandmother, the kind of food that people said, every time they tasted it, was the best they had ever eaten. He had believed the food would be enough. He had learned, expensively, that food is almost never enough on its own. Logistics, marketing, pricing, systems, things he had not known he did not know until the not knowing had cost him everything he had saved. He had tried to pivot, a market stall, then a partnership with a local restaurant, then a meal prep delivery service that had 11 customers in the first week and 4 by the fourth. He had applied for 3 small business grants. 2 had rejected him without explanation. The third had asked for documentation he did not have and could not obtain in the time window they specified. He had borrowed money from his older sister, not much, enough to try one more thing, and the one more thing had also not worked, and now the borrowed money was gone. And his sister was too kind to say what she was thinking, and the kindness of it was somehow worse than if she had said it. 3 years, everything he had, and the result was a room with nothing in it, a debt that felt enormous, even though by other people's measures it was small, and a hope that had, on the night our story really begins, simply stopped, not dramatically, not with a decision. It just stopped, the way a fire stops when the last of what feeds it is gone. No announcement, no final flare, just the stopping. He sat on the floor that night because the chair felt too deliberate. Sitting on the floor was not a choice exactly. It was what happened when the energy required to make choices ran out. He sat in the corner, back against the wall, and let the city light come through the window and fall across him in cold strips. And he did something he had not allowed himself to do in 3 years of trying. He stopped trying to figure out what to do next, not as a strategy, not as a deliberate pause to reset and recalibrate, simply because there was nothing left to figure with. The part of him that generated next plans, next pivots, next attempts, that part had gone quiet, completely quiet. For the first time in 3 years, there was no next plan forming in the background, just silence, and the cold blue of the city through the glass. He sat there for a long time. He did not know how long. He was not tracking it. And in the silence, in the specific silence of a man who has run out of everything, including the noise of trying, something happened that he could not have predicted and could not have manufactured and would not have been able to receive if a single grain of hope had still been operational. He heard himself, not a voice, not a message, just the sound of who he actually was, underneath the 3 years of plans and pivots and attempts and the constant noise of trying to become something. And what he heard was not what he expected. What he heard was a question, not an inspiring one, a plain one. What did you actually love about this? Not the success of it that had never arrived, not the validation that had been mostly absent, Not the money, there had been none. What had he actually loved in the doing of it across 3 years of trying? He sat with that question for a long time. And the answer, when it came, surprised him in the way that true answers surprise you. Not because they are unexpected exactly, but because you recognize them so completely that you cannot understand how you managed not to see them before. He had loved the cooking, not the business of food, the cooking itself, the specific morning hours when he had been in a kitchen before any of the other concerns arrived, working with his hands, the smell of it, the way a dish came together from separate things into something that was more than any of its parts. He had loved the moments when someone tasted what he had made and their face did the thing that faces do when food is genuinely good. That involuntary small surrender of expression that means the body has been surprised by pleasure. He had loved those moments completely, with the wholeness of a man in exactly the right place everything else. The logistics, the marketing, the grant applications, the pivots. He had endured. He had believed those things were the price of the thing he loved, the necessary cost of turning a passion into a livelihood. But what if the price had been too high? Not because he was not willing to pay it, but because he had been paying for the wrong version of the thing? He got up off the floor at 2 in the morning, not with a plan. With a question, he went to the kitchen, small, basic, the same kitchen he had cooked in when the business was still alive and the mornings had still felt like possibility. He turned on the single overhead light. He looked at what was in the cupboards. There was not much. Enough. He began to cook, not for anyone, not for a customer or a client or a potential partner, for no reason except that it was 2 in the morning and he had just heard something true about himself, and the only response that felt honest was to go to the kitchen. He cooked for 2 hours. By 4 in the morning, there was food on the counter, more than he could eat, more than made any practical sense, and he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Not hope, not yet. Something quieter and more fundamental than hope. He felt like himself. The next morning he called his sister. He had been avoiding this call for 2 weeks, since the money was clearly not returning. He had been rehearsing versions of the apology in his head, each one inadequate in a different way. When she answered, he did not deliver any version of the rehearsed apology. He said, "I cooked last night. For the first time in months I cooked because I wanted to, not because I needed to sell something. And I realized I have been trying to build the wrong thing." His sister was quiet for a moment. She was a practical woman, not given to sentiment, but not without warmth. "What is the right thing?" she said. He did not have a complete answer, but he had the beginning of one. "I do not know yet," he said, "but I think it starts in a kitchen, not an office. And I think it starts with cooking for real people who are actually there, not for a market I am trying to reach." She was quiet again for a moment. "I know someone," she said, "who runs a community center 3 streets from here. They have been looking for someone to run a weekly cooking session for the elderly residents. It does not pay much, but it is a kitchen and real people." Thomas wrote the number down. The community center smelled of institutional cleaning products and something underneath that. Old wood, decades of gathered lives, the particular warmth of a building that has held people through hard things for a long time. The coordinator was a woman named Ruth, 60s, efficient, the kind of person who assessed you in the first 30 seconds and moved on. She assessed Thomas in 30 seconds, decided something, and showed him the kitchen. It was small and adequate. Nothing more. "Wednesday afternoons," she said. 12 to 15 residents. Most of them have not had a proper home-cooked meal made in front of them in years. Some of them have not had one in decades. "We cannot pay you much." She named a figure. It was less than the cost of his transport. "When do I start?" Thomas said. He started the following Wednesday. The first session had 14 residents, ages ranging from 71 to 89, several in wheelchairs. One woman who had not spoken to anyone outside her room in 3 months, who had come only because the coordinator had personally walked her down the corridor and waited while she got her cardigan. Thomas cooked his grandmother's pepper soup. He talked while he cooked, not a performance, just the natural conversation of a man in a kitchen, explaining what he was doing and why, the history of the dish, what his grandmother had told him about it, the way a particular spice changes everything if you add it at the wrong moment. The 14 residents were completely silent, not from disinterest, from attention. The specific attention of people who have not been talked to, as though their presence matters in a very long time. When the soup was ready and served, the woman who had not spoken to anyone in 3 months looked at Thomas and said 5 words. "Your grandmother taught you well." Thomas did not trust his voice for a moment. "She did," he said, when he could. He went back the following Wednesday, and the one after that Ruth started paying him a slightly higher figure after the 3rd session, without explanation or fanfare. She simply handed him a different envelope and moved on to the next thing on her list. By the 6th session, 2 things had happened that Thomas had not planned. First, 3 of the residents had begun bringing their own handwritten recipe cards to share with him. Dishes from their own lifetimes, things their mothers and grandmothers had made, some of them written in languages he could not read but had photographed carefully. A quiet, unofficial exchange had begun. His recipes going out to them, their recipes coming into him. Second, a journalist had visited the community center for an unrelated story about elderly care facilities, had ended up staying for the cooking session, had eaten the food and spoken to the residents, and written a short piece about it that was published not in a newspaper but in a local community newsletter with a circulation of approximately 3,000 people. The piece described Thomas not as a businessman or a caterer, but as something else. The word she used was companion. She wrote about the way he talked while he cooked, the way the residents listened, the specific kind of nourishment that was happening in that kitchen. That was not only about the food. The piece went modestly viral in the neighborhood. 14 people contacted the community center asking if Thomas offered private or community cooking sessions elsewhere. Ruth showed him the messages. Her expression, for the first time, was something other than efficient assessment. "It seems," she said, "that you have found something. What came next did not happen overnight." I want to be clear about that, because the temptation in telling a story like this is to compress the timeline into something that sounds like a miracle when the actual thing was quieter and more gradual and more real than any miracle. What came next happened over 8 months. Thomas began offering weekend cooking sessions. Not classes exactly, more like the same thing he did at the community center, cooking in front of people and talking while he cooked, the history and the technique and the story of each dish. He charged a modest amount. He held them in the community center kitchen on Saturday mornings because Ruth, who had become something between a mentor and a landlady in the arrangement of his life, offered him the space in exchange for a continued Wednesday session. The sessions filled. Slowly at first. 4 people, then 7, then 11. Word spread in the specific way that things spread when they are genuinely good and not being marketed. Person to person, without strategy, because the experience of being in that kitchen on a Saturday morning was something people wanted to give to the people they cared about. He began documenting the sessions, not for marketing, because the residents' recipe cards had given him an idea that he could not quite stop thinking about. He was accumulating something, not just recipes, stories. Each dish came with a person, and each person came with a lifetime, and each lifetime contained things that would disappear from the world when the person was gone. He started writing them down. The recipes and the stories together, the way they belonged together, the way one made no complete sense without the other. He did not call it a book. Not yet. A year after the night he sat on the floor with no hope left, Thomas looked at what existed, not what he had planned. What actually existed, The Wednesday sessions continued. He had expanded them to include a cooking session for children on the last Wednesday of each month because 3 of the elderly residents had requested it, saying they wanted to watch children learn what they knew before the knowing was gone. The children came from a school 2 streets away. The sessions had a 4-month waiting list. The Saturday sessions had become something he could live on, not richly, but fully. He paid his sister back, in full, on a quiet Tuesday, handing her an envelope with a handwritten note inside that simply said, "Thank you for asking the right question." The book. He was now calling it a book, privately, in the notebook, had 43 complete entries. Recipes with their stories, lives documented in the way that lives deserve to be documented. Not as summaries, but as particular, irreplaceable accounts of specific people who had made specific things in specific kitchens and loved specific people across decades that the world was not keeping any other record of. He had not tried to publish it. He had not approached anyone. He was not ready, and he knew he was not ready. And he had learned in 3 years of trying that moving before readiness is its own form of waste, but he was closer. And the closeness felt completely different from anything he had known before, because it was not the desperate closeness of someone running out of time and money and trying to force something into existence before it was ready. It was the calm closeness of someone building something that was taking exactly as long as it needed to take. My friend Thomas's story is not really about food, and it is not really about success in the way that word is usually used. It is about what becomes possible when hope runs out. I want to sit with that for a moment because I think it is the most important thing in this entire story and the most likely to be misunderstood. Hope is not always a friend to the thing you are trying to build. Hope, when it is desperate, when it is the last thing standing between you and the admission that something is not working, becomes a pressure. It becomes the thing that makes you move too fast, pivot too often, try things before they are ready, perform confidence you do not feel for people who can sense you do not feel it. Desperate hope is loud. And the thing you are actually supposed to be building, the right version of the thing, the one that fits who you actually are, is quiet. It speaks in the register of what you loved before you needed it to pay. Thomas could not hear it for 3 years because desperate hope was too loud. On the night the hope ran out, on the night he sat on the floor with the city light falling across him in cold strips and nothing left. The silence finally came, and in the silence, the quiet thing finally had space to speak. What did you actually love about this? That question is available to you right now. Not later, not after the next attempt. Right now, not what do you want to achieve, not what do you need to prove, not what would make the people who doubted you look foolish. What did you actually love about the thing you have been trying to build? Strip away the ambition and the necessity and the performance of it. What remains? What is the part that made you feel, even briefly, like yourself? That part is not a luxury. That part is not something to return to after you have been successful. That part is the direction. It was always the direction. The reason it has not yet led you where you need to go is not that it was wrong. It is that everything else was too loud. Thomas's grandmother's soup did not become a book because Thomas was brilliant or lucky or connected. It became a book because on the night Thomas had nothing left, he went to the kitchen not to build anything, but because the kitchen was the truest thing he knew. And when you go toward the truest thing you know, not as a strategy, not as a pivot, just because it is true, the world has a way of finding you there, not immediately, not without more work, but with a different quality of finding. The kind that feels like recognition rather than arrival, like you have not discovered something new, but returned to something that was always already yours. So here is what I want to leave you with. One question, one honest question for tonight before you sleep. If the hope ran out right now, if you were sitting on the floor with the city light falling across you and no next plan forming, What would you go toward? Not the thing you should want, not the thing that would prove something. The thing that is simply, quietly, in the register of your truest self. Go toward that thing, not because it will definitely work, not because the path is clear. Because when you are in the place that is most truly yours, the thing that needs to find you finally knows where to look. If this story moved something in you, like this video right now, not as a victory lap, but as a reminder that you carry the right thing somewhere inside you, share it with someone who is sitting in the dark right now and has stopped hoping, because they need to know that the stopping is not the end. Tell me in the comments, what is the truest thing you know? What is the thing you would go toward if everything else fell away? I want to hear it. I will be back with another story. Until then, remember this. When all hope was gone, the noise finally stopped. And in the silence, the right thing finally spoke. That is not the end of the story. That is where the story begins.